Welcome back to Animal Crossing New Horizons. I'm dear darling. Should we see what's going on our lovely island of Fawnhallow today? Well, we'll be relaxing as per usual. Done with D&D session for today. Actually recording a little bit earlier than usual, I suppose, because we had a tiny bit of a shorter session. Like we shaved about an hour off. Because one of the players was feeling a little bit under the weather. So we were just like, alright, we don't have to do it for the entire time. 2 hours I think is plenty as well to get stuff done. So, yeah, good evening everyone. Right now in Fawnhallow, it's 10:05 PM on Monday, January 27th, 2025. This is a much more of a combat-oriented session. So there's not really much to say lore-wise, I suppose, but I can talk, because combat's easier to sort of peel back behind the scenes to be like, oh yeah, this is like what I had intended for this fight. And this fight, I had always intended it to be not so directly like, here's how you fight. This is like, like a meat sponge and throw damage at it. Because that's what some of the fights have been. Not all of the fights, I do try and introduce some different things here and there with like different goals, etc, etc. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and it kind of depends, because the difficult part is also that your players have to understand exactly that there is a different objective rather than it just being a straight up like slugfest. But this time it was a little bit different because it was meant to be what it was meant to be. It was kind of like and it did kind of work like as I expected. It just like it went way better for players than I expected because of something I will get onto in a moment. But it's meant to be kind of like an escort quote mission where you are escorting. But they basically are travelling with this NPC who is someone who is basically attuned with dimensional rifts, kind of, and she has the ability to like close them and open them. So yeah, she's not like by any stretch of imagination. She's not like a weak NPC. She's like that's a thing with escort quests, which I know from game design. It makes it very frustrating. As if the thing you're escorting is basically paper thin, fragile. Would die in a single hit. While it can be an interesting challenge, sometimes I think on the long run it's actually quite frustrating. So this NPC can hold her own, kind of. But not like my intention was like we're not going to be completely over the top, like do huge amounts of damage, and I would do that just by building them and then playing them inefficiently, because this NPC was insanely scared and insanely pessimistic about herself, that she would she basically sort of doesn't realise her own strength, and is probably what I'd say in a way. So she doesn't even try, but doesn't even think that she can try is perhaps a better way to put it. Self-defeatist, how about that, and it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So part of the combat was the fact that she is the only one who can deal with these rift portals. To be fair, my players came up with a clever way, because they had dealt with portals before. If they came up with a clever way to deal with them, because I was like, I don't know if any of them have like a dispelling magic. I don't think they do, but if they do, they can do that, or they can do a similar thing where they just overwhelm with brute force and magic and impact, and that would also work. Possibly coming at a caveat of something difficult happening again, but by far and way the most easy way for them to do it would be for this NPC to close them, because I even dropped the hints before, being like, oh yeah, this NPC has gone around like closing some of the rifts here and there. In the previous session there were some conversations about it. There's been so much emphasis that yes, she is attuned, like weirdly, like not weirdly attuned, but quite attuned to this other dimensional plane. She'll probably at least be able to do something about it. But the problem is, there was like, that's the solution. What's a dilemma is that she's a very terrified NPC who, and would, in my mind, was like, we need to take some convincing, we need to take some escorting about the place, because I was going to be like, okay, she's frightened, she will not do the action unless you convince her to do it, like persuade her to do it, and she will not go like within any amount of distance between these enemies, and will not retaliate in attack will not attack unless she knows she's absolutely safe from it, because she can do decent damage. She is still built as a character. That was my mind. So it's like an escort quest. She's not paper thin. So like, if a enemy decides to attack or she's caught in AoE, she's not just gonna explode and then completely lose the encounter and lose everything. But at the same time, it's like there's a difficulty. Like, do I trade off like doing damage to these enemies but spawning on these portals and trying to crowd control a little bit, or do I spend my turn trying to, you know, convince this NPC to help us, or trying to escort this NPC or clear a path, or, you know, defend this NPC while she's doing her thing. And then that was going to be it. There were 3 portals about the place, so I basically had to not convince her 3 times, depends kind of how they convince her, but convince her to close these 3 portals using 3 of her actions. And I was like, that will probably be like a decent battle, because, you know, it'll probably take like a turn or 2 to actually probably convince her, and then like 1 turn each portal, that's 3 portals, and then maybe like 1 or 2 turns to like transport her in between. 7-turn combat seems reasonable enough. But then this is where first time where it's properly happened, where like the player has actually surprised me with something, because I tend to know what my players have and built pretty well. I obviously don't know every facet, and sometimes they use things quite creatively. But in this case, my player surprised me because I didn't realise she had this spell, or I did realise that, but I completely forgot and all kind of forgot that heroism can do this. But she has a spell, heroism. I was like, what spell could completely trivialize this counter? Maybe like calm emotions or something like that. But I was like, I don't think any of them have calm emotions, because I think that's like I think she could have taken it, but I don't think she did. Maybe, no, I don't know. But I completely forgot about heroism. But what heroism does is basically they just act like courageously as possible. Not act as courageously as possible, but like they're filled with courage and determination and bravery until the spell ends, and they are immune to being frightened or something and temporary hit points. And I was like, hot damn, you completely almost trivialized this entire encounter through this as well. So, you know, and then to peel back the curtain more, I suppose, as a DM, the encounter was meant to be a bit more of a slow burn. What I ended up doing was I was like, okay, this, like, if I don't do something for this encounter is going to be an absolute cakewalk, which would be really boring, because then they won't get to have a chance to do anything. Because what was going to happen is each turn, new enemies will spawn in. So it'd be like weak enemies to begin with for like the first 2 turns, then like slightly stronger enemies for the next 2 turns, and more enemies for the next 2 turns, to try and like keep it like manageable. Like, it's about crowd control, and so they have time to be able to understand what is going on. But then I was like, okay, one of the PCs just made the NPC completely heroic. Now she's not scared, so I was like, it doesn't make sense for her to go run hiding anymore. It doesn't make sense for her not to attack, and it doesn't make sense for her to not want to go near any of the enemies. She felt like this was the better course of action, because she knows what the course of action is. She was just, what she needs to do, the NPC, it's just she would have been too scared to do it. So I was like, okay, you completely upended this. So I did a little sneaky thing with DM where, you know, you change things a little bit on the fly. You don't cheat in that sense, but I'm just like, okay, the higher level enemies are basically just going to come out a little bit faster, essentially. I basically accelerated the pace, because also the NPC rolled extraordinarily well and closed all the portals on like each turn, basically. So like turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, the portals were done. So that's why if you're a PC and you're playing, you're wondering, that's why it was like, whoa, it's only accelerated up. It wasn't gonna be that fast, but because the combat encounter would otherwise be trivial and boring, in my opinion, if there was no enemies to fight. Otherwise you'd be fighting with tiny imps, and then that'd be it, it'll be done. I'll be like, what's the point of this encounter? And might as well not have done it. Because that's the thing, you want it to be able to make it easier, but not completely trivialize it. So that's why, I mean, the encounter, I still was like, okay, you should be rewarded for that. I'm not going to make it as difficult as it could have been, because the initial counter was slated to be harder than it obviously currently was, but mainly because it was a slow burn of all the enemies coming in, and it was sort of balancing her turns between doing damage and making progress on this goal. But with this basically meant that the goal, the only thing left was to do damage to the enemies, because the goal would progress kind of naturally by itself. And also help that I put the portals like decently fast, so it's like, okay, she'd had to spend a turn running from one portal to the other, and then that same player character was like, alright, dimension door her next to it. And I was like, okay, fair enough, you know, you should be rewarded for this, with this, where it's not the hardest fight in the world, because now this NPC is also fighting for you, like less enemies are spawning. They did spawn in quicker, mind you, but like less of them spawned, because it would have been 1 for each portal, but like by turn 2 of them were closed, so it was only 1 portal left. So, you know, it's like, let's make it actually feel like a boss fight as well. So it was basically the bare minimum boss fight. And, you know, my players have done this before. Like, I had originally slated for the end of Act 1 for it to be a double boss fight between 2 characters, and it was meant to be, like, really quite hard, so they'd had to think about it carefully. But then they just ambushed one of the characters, like, way early on, just completely destroyed them. And I was like, okay, that has kind of ruined my double boss fight. So, you know, I improvised it again next session. I was like, okay, well, let's add a different layer of difficulty to this boss fight. This boss ends up ambushing them because they took too long. That's kind of what it's all about. Being able to think on your feet to sort of keep things moving, in a sense. That was like rare time I did it like in session. Because it's the sort of thing where like very easy for me as a DM to see that happen, the player do that and be like, you don't get rewarded for that, I'm going to make the fight as difficult as it was before. But I was like, no. You did a good play, you should be rewarded for it. And honestly, they basically breezed through the entire fight. The only one player, which is the DM PC in the end, took like a decent amount of damage, but that's because they got critically hit. And then one, the summon from the DM PC also died, which they'll see the consequences of that next session, which is pretty crazy. Because this is the first time this happened, and I didn't expect it to be here, of all places, but so be it. Yeah. So, I don't know what to say except for just got like kind of surprised that, and I was like, alright, there's your reward. The fight will be easier, as it should be. You won't have to balance crowd control of endlessly spawning enemies. They're just, you have a finite amount, there you go. just deal with them. And I was like, fair enough, sometimes that happens. And because that happens, I think it's very exciting from a DM perspective. I was like, whoa, that's pretty cool. Because, you know, very much in the moment I was like, oh, hot damn, is this entire fight ruined if I don't do anything? But the answer is always, no, you can always do something. Like, sometimes you have to improv, and obviously you improv a lot as a DM, but you do things to sort of bring it out to balance. But you got to have a balance between, like, obviously in this case, you bring it up to balance, like, by making it a little bit harder than it would have been if you did literally nothing more. Because if they did nothing more, then they literally, would have fought 5 quasets and 1 will-o-wisp, which is a completely trivial fight. Like a waste of time fight. So you bring up the difficulty a little bit. So it's like, okay, let's actually get the boss monster in, you know. But they're rewarded for efforts as well by the fact that, yeah, it's still easy. Now it's like, your team is even stronger because you have someone else fighting on your side, you have less enemies to face, and you don't have to worry about this other progression which is going on. It's sort of automatically taking care of itself. So that's a reward. It's hard to say that's a reward because obviously the PCs, they can't like replay the fight. They can't know how the fight was going to go if it didn't do that. Which is why, you know, I don't mind sort of peeling back the curtain on these sort of things, of being like, hey, this is what I intended. The fight was intended, like the fight was meant to be, it would be 6 quasets, 6 will-o-wisps, staggered out over time. 3 hellhounds, and 1 or 2 of spine demons, or spine devils I think we were, spawning. Which 2 would only have been if they like really completely messed up, in my opinion. So they basically got rid of 1 hellhound, they got rid of 4 of a will-o-wisps, and they got rid of most of the quasets? 2 quasets I think, like immediately, and it's like, okay. Like, fair enough. You basically slashed the fight in half. So yeah, not a lot of damage happened, mind you. And that's totally fine. The players should be able to win. Like, I don't pose these challenges, I suppose, as a DM to be like, okay, I'm going to do this to beat you. I pose these challenges to be like, alright, what are you going to do about it? You know, come at me, come at it, do something creative, come at it, do something cool, come at something, outsmart me, or, you know, fail trying sometimes as well. And that is fun in itself too. So yeah, I don't know, it was very cool to see what came of it. And yeah, sometimes a simple spell can trivialize things. Obviously, it didn't completely trivialize. I'm not going to lie and say, like, oh yeah, it was a complete walk in the park. It was just, yeah, a lot easier than it was meant to be. Because it was kind of meant to feel like a midpoint of of the act. I'm not really sure if it's from a midpoint, but maybe like the first mini boss of the combat, right? That's what a bit like, you know, if that act has like mini boss 1, mini boss 2, and then final boss or something, this was meant to be like mini boss 1, quote quote, or something to recontextualize everything back in the story again, because they haven't fought demons for a long while, mainly because they've not really been in a dangerous position. And yeah, they leveled up to level 8 in maybe a bit of an anticlimactic boss fight, to be honest. The other party, their level 8 fight was very like down to the wire, in my opinion, but this one was sort of like, I don't think any of them were basically in any danger whatsoever. Like, the healer still had all healing spells up. Essentially, there could have been a lot more damage. It could have ended a lot faster as well, had the summon not gone down as well. But yeah, I don't know. Sometimes the players outsmart you, and you just had to be like, damn, you got me. And it's great. It's straight up fantastico. It's probably what I'd say. So yeah, I guess I might know around this episode of here. I'm not sure what I'm going to title this episode, but I'm glad I got that moment. I'm glad I get that humbling moment as a DM, you know, where you're just like, damn, what do I do now? Obviously, as a DM, you are in control of everything, so, you know, you can, I mean, if I wanted to, I could just be like, you all died, but like, why would I do that? You have to be a fair game engine and a fair games master. Well, you have to be a fair game engine, as in you can't cheat the situation, but I still see it as like you can be like the Left 4 Dead engine, whereas like if they're having too easy a time, you make it a little bit harder. If they're having too difficult time, you make it a little bit easier. You kind of adjust the dynamics on the fly, but you never like outright lie. Like, you know, don't fudge the numbers, don't fudge the dice or things like that. You change your difficulty in a way that is transparent, you know, rather than being like, oh, this is one boss with like 5 mini summons. You'd be like, ooh, you know, they took a rough beating before this, you know, maybe we'll just do one boss with 2 mini summons. And you might say that's kind of cheating because you've written down as like 5 mini things to begin with. Yeah, I wrote that down in the context of them fighting it straight up and having like nothing. No, this is not about the actual fight, this is like a theoretical fight. You plan the fights on the base context of thinking that they're going to go into it with the amount of resources you know they have, and that they have done nothing special to skew a fight either in their favour or against their favour, right? So you don't lie in that regard. But you can, in my opinion, adjust it to make it make sense towards the situation, right? That's what I think. I don't know, maybe that's too much peering behind the veil, but there you go. I feel like it's good to be a little bit transparent. And then if one of my players gets very upset about that sort of thing, then, you know, whatever. I guess we can talk about that. I don't mean that in a dismissive way, but it's sort of thing, like, obviously we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But, like, yeah, I mean, I feel like they have to expect there's some level of improv going on. And I want to make sure. I prioritise it being a fun time over anything else. So, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to round this episode up here, so if you have been watching, thank you very much. It's been Animal Crossing New Horizons. I've been Dear Darling. Likes, comments, subscription, shares, greatly appreciated. Socials, Discord down below. Hope we see each other again, but for now, it's our farewell. So until next time, bye-bye for now.